Welcome everyone to this very exciting fireside chat. I'm absolutely delighted to bring two very accomplished individuals in the data space. And we can, I think, officially call this a once in a blue moon gathering of great minds. May not happen for several more years, at least on a blue moon. So no pun unintended there. So welcome to, first of all, Noel Johanna. Let me start with a quick introduction. Noel is a principal analyst with Forrester, having 25 plus years of experience with data strategy, and as I learned recently, even more number of years of experience, including with one of the largest data centers on the planet in its time. So very warm welcome, Noel. Very excited to have you here, and thank you for making it. And our second panelist today is Gaurav Shen. Gaurav, again, an accomplished data and banking professional, having worked with several large banks, and more pertinent to today, is founder and creator of SCIKIQ, a low-code, no-code data fabric platform. So thank you again for making it. And of course, a very warm welcome and thank you to all the audience who have made it. Very quick layout. We're gonna spend about 45 to 50 minutes in some moderated Q&A with Gaurav and Noel. Please feel free to post questions as they come along in the chat. Towards the end, we would pick as many questions as we can as the time permits. And also, if you have follow-on questions, we would post it in chat. There is an email, info@scikiq.com, to which you can send those questions. And as we talk, we would continue to also put some interesting polls up there, and we can actually start with the first poll, which is really, you can get started with what are the current data management challenges that all of you face. Again, there's a number of options out there that you can consider. So while you guys poll, I would like to really open it up and start with, directing my very first question to Noel. We will be covering data fabric, data mesh, and key architectural concepts and strategies around data. So Noel, from your perspective, could you talk about the key benefits of adopting a data fabric approach as opposed to a more traditional approach?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I as an analyst get to speak to a lot of customers every day. And these are like those banks and insurance companies and retailers and healthcare. And what's interesting is that, obviously everyone is moving to the cloud, right? That's like the one big thing. But they're also realizing that as they get to the cloud, there's so many of these challenges they have, right? Like real-time data isn't available. We can't really integrate the data because the data is in silos. We have data probably on premises and cloud. So some of these challenges are so difficult to overcome, right? Especially with governance, controls, and real-timeness of data and simplification. And that's what we're seeing. The fabric actually is a very modern architecture, right? So what is the benefits is that you're trying to overcome these challenges in a manner to connect to this consistency of data, right? So one of the fundamental importance of data fabric is to deliver consistent and trusted data across your applications and also insights and analytics, right? Across all these workloads, not just one application, across all applications, across all analytical solutions as well, right? Deployments. So when you look at data, right? Data is all in silos. So if somebody goes to the cloud, there'll be different files, different databases, but how do you integrate them? You can write Java programs to do that, right? That's one way of doing it. Is that slow? If another source comes in, you write another Java program. How about having it in an automated manner, right? How about integrating those data in an automated manner? And that's what the fabric does, is to deliver that integration of data across these silos in a consistent, trusted manner. Remember, more than 30% of data in an organization is duplicated, which means the data is duplicated. And when you use duplicated data, what happens? The data becomes inconsistent because it may go through transformation as well. The benefits of Fabric are many, right? So as I mentioned, trusted data, consistent data, but it also is driving real-time data, which means that I can get to any source of data, whether it's connected data source or even external data sources like social media, like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, connected in real time, right? And that's amazing, right? Including your databases like transactional systems and data warehouses, you can integrate. So all of these data could be integrated because it's got connectors to all these things as well, right? So real time is a very big initiative. It's also have to do with agility, right? It's agile. Someone comes up and say, well, we need to integrate this new source of data. You can do that in seconds, in minutes, not like hours and days, right? So that's very big. But also it's got self-service capabilities, right? Self-service is very important, especially to do automation, right? The integration, the transformation. And what is the Fabric? Fabric is this end-to-end data management, right? Data management is a very complex topic, as you guys know, right? Data ingestion and transformation and governance and security and preparation and quality. All of these are part of data management. And then what is the problem is that every organization has 24 data management tools. And those 24 data management tools do not work together, right? And that's the big issue. So the Fabric is basically, the benefit is having one whole end-to-end platform to doing ingestion and transformation and governance and security and preparation all together in a single end-to-end platform. And that's the value proposition. It's about agility. It's about time to value. It's about real-timeness and about trusted data.
Excellent. I think that was a great summary. Thanks, Noel. And as I was glancing at the polls, looks like silos, volumes, and security and governance almost were like neck and neck in terms of equal percentage of votes in terms of the challenges. So given all those benefits that you talked about, I think my next question, which I think we should also put up on the poll, is what do you see as the biggest challenges in adopting the data fabric itself? Now, the benefits are well understood, but it's easier said than done, as we all know. So what are, from your perspective, the biggest challenges in adopting the fabric? And as Noel, you take it along, I'll encourage the audience to also vote on the second poll.
Yeah. I mean, the challenges are there, right? It's one of the big issues, I think, is if it's bad data, the sources are bad, having bad data, your Fabric is going to pick up bad data and deliver bad data. It's basically garbage in, garbage out, right? So the GIGO kind of thing goes in place with Fabric. Fabric, the real-time data quality is a very difficult thing to do. We are still kind of evolving our architectures around real-time data quality. But if data is bad, how do you actually do a better level of ensuring the data is going to be trusted and consistent as well, right? Because you're dealing with real-time data, right? And that's why the bigger issue is data quality, right? Number two, I think, is data governance, right? How do you ensure that the data which you are getting from these source systems are not containing sensitive data? It could be compliance data, right? GDPR data or private data, credit card data, what have you, right? So you got to be careful. So how do you govern control? Because the Fabric itself has got all these different connections to different sources, perfectly fine. But the question is that source may be having all sensitive data as well, right? So how do you govern this data in real time? New sources may be connected today. Today, somebody may be connecting to a new source of data, but has somebody explored the data? Has somebody ensured that data is not sensitive? And if it is sensitive, who gets to see what data, right? So governance plays a big role. Also, we see challenges with data, with performance and scale, right? Because we are talking about multiple workloads running, like running applications and insights and analytics. There could be an impact on performance and scale, right? Because now everyone's trying to hit at that Fabric layer, which is a semantic layer. What happens to the performance and low latency accesses, right? So people, when we speak to customers in the banks and the insurance companies, they run into all kinds of performance issues, right? So you obviously have to have ample hardware, ample memory architectures like DRAM and flash within the whole architecture as well. And I think the whole idea is actually how do you ensure of these consistency as well. There's also a challenge. A lot of solutions out there in the fabric world are all these disconnected products. So the problem is that solutions which are in their fabric are not connected very well. So as I mentioned, the fabric is a composure of multiple data management functions like data ingestion and transformation and governance and security and preparation quality. And how do you actually have all those functions together in a platform which is very well integrated? So you'll find solutions out there which may not have those connections of all these established very well. So definitely look for solutions that are very well integrated, all of these data management functions together and harmonized it together, right? So those are things. So these are, I think, the 3 or 4 challenges we have seen from performance and scale to integrated solution requirements towards governance and data quality being some of those important ones, you know.
Very interesting, Noel. Again, thanks for that valuable insight. And as I was again looking at the poll results, in addition to those quality, harmonization, product sprawl kind of challenges, I think one of the second ranking there, one of the big ones was also, time to implement. And on that note, I would probably bring in Gaurav, you right into the discussion, not just around the time to implement, but you as a provider, and if I can use the word inventor or evolver of a data fabric, data mesh platform, what do you see SCIKIQ's role, if you want to talk a little bit about SCIKIQ in addressing some of these challenges? How do you think, SCIKIQ adds value?
Yeah, sure. See, I think Noel has already summed it up. Like, when you look at purely from a data fabric standpoint, so what is the end result? What is the end result enterprises are targeting for? So they are looking for a consistent and a unified view of the data. So I'm just calling it out, and I'll build my argument around that, like, how SCIKIQ is able to help you do that. So it's a unified and a consistent view of data, what you're looking when you are trying to implement a data fabric. And now when you are trying to put a data mesh, because you mentioned 2 terms here, data fabric and a data mesh. So when you are looking at purely from a data mesh architecture standpoint, here, how you can do it on a distributed or a federated kind of a setup, where you are giving the power to the people who are subject matter expert in their own area, so that they can participate in this data fabrication journey. So I just want to put the 2 terms out, and before even I get into the SCIKIQ part. So now how SCIKIQ help to create a unified data view? So I'll come to the term unified. Data is scattered all across, right? So data is sitting on-premise, data is sitting on multiple clouds, which means you have a hybrid multi-cloud kind of a setup. We are talking here about large organizations, right? So the problem what we are trying to solve, or the problem which data fabric or data mesh architecture will solve, is primarily for a medium to large corporate, not for a small to medium corporates. So I just want to make that fundamental point very clear. So here, what Noel and I am talking about is a problem of large enterprises where data is spread across multiple applications. So other than the product sprawl, he talked about 20 plus system, 24 plus systems or data management systems in place to solve for a data strategy issue, right? So there is a product sprawl which is happening. And if you count the number of the application, what the average large enterprises uses, it is upward of hundreds, right? So now you have a lot of apps which are producing data sitting across multiple topologies. So how you can build a unified view? So SCIKIQ help you integrate data, be it sitting on your on-premise infrastructure, be it on cloud A, cloud B, cloud C, cloud D, in a unified way. And there are 2 patterns what we support. Sometimes, you want to move the data. which Noel will not agree, because we have a lot of discussion earlier. So yeah, still there are a lot of companies who want to move the data, want to build lake warehouse kind of architecture. So you want to integrate and move the data and build a central repository like a data lake or a data warehouse kind of architecture. Or second, when he was talking about real time doesn't only means Kafka or implementing something which is a real-time technology. Real time means how you can have a unified, if you're working within a fraud, right? You want to detect fraud at the time of incident, not fraud 3 hours later. So which means a unified or real-time view of the data is very important. And this is where data federation is another pattern which needs to be there, where data is sitting on whatever source it is and how you can have a unified view of the data. So SCIKIQ help you build that unified view. Second, when we talk about consistency is all linked to your data quality. It is linked to your data governance practices. So, you in today's world, you cannot afford, you have one system, which is your traditional ETL, which will pick up data from Teradata or whatever. In Teradata, oops, you realize, okay, my data isn't clear. My credit card numbers are in clear because it's a legacy system. Now, if you are modernizing your architecture, at the same time, you need to identify, you need to segregate the PI, which is personal identifiable information. You need to do the information classification. So these are the things which are required, right? So these are not optional, so as to say you cannot put another product. So what SCIKIQ does, SCIKIQ takes care of 4 things. So SCIKIQ has 4 modules. One, SCIKIQ Connect, which connect to any data store, picks up the data, help you either to migrate the data or to set up a Delta or a real-time integration. That's one. Second, SCIKIQ Curate. Once you have data connected and data picked up from the store, now you want to curate the data so that businesses at the end, they can start consuming the data. Data is very ugly. It is not in a shape or a format which is easily consumable by the business. So which means it needs to be cleaned, it needs to be governed, it needs to be wrangled, it needs to be enhanced, it needs to be enriched. So there's a lot of operations which needs to be done in order to curate the data so that business can start consuming it. So that's a curation part. So that module is responsible for curating the data. Third, once you do that, the next stage is how we can bring everything closer to the business, because that's the key purpose of having a data fabric in place. Because if you look at the traditional way is all suited for one persona, which is a technical persona. You need to hire a lot of SIs. It's you are linearly growing your full-time equivalents, and with your data fabric or data mesh kind of a topology, how you can do a non-linear growth on your data fabric when you are onboarding new sources, right? So third is consumption. So whether it's traditional reports or dashboard, or you want to push data as a service, or you want to push data as a product. So how that platform can support you in solving for multiple consumption patterns which are required for different personas, so that it can cater to multiple personas. So that's a component 3. And the 4th module is underlying all of this, there is a strong layer of SCIKIQ control or a SCIKIQ governance, which is responsible for making sure there's a right level of metadata, and metadata get activated. So just having a metadata in some place is not going to solve any problem. So how we are differentiated within SCIKIQ is, I call it as a first generation metadata tool, because we pick up the metadata first, and then we automate the data pipelines. We automate all the processes using that metadata. We guide the user at each and every step. So the question what we have asked ourselves while designing SCIKIQ is how it is making life easier for the person or for the persona who's using this particular module. So these 4 components are glued together as part of standard SCIKIQ offering. And that's how I think, we are solving this problem. And on top of it, everything is done on a data domain driven architecture, which means you can create multiple data domains, which is more tuned to data mesh, or how a large organization, they have to manage their data landscape, because that's how the businesses are set up. So to increase the adoption, what we have from day one, what we have thought of, rather than putting data domain architecture later and just building a fabric or a central repository. Why don't we start with the data domain architecture first, map everything to the value chain, and from that value chain, based on your persona, because that's how businesses understand technology. They are not in a business of IT, they are in their own business, right? So that's what data domain architecture brings to them.
That sounds really really empowering. And if I could summarize, what I heard is really that you're solving the classical challenges that business faces. I think the traditional approaches use a very linear model of bringing value from the data to the business. And I think what I'm hearing is that you're reducing that time for bringing data to value by saying that you do not need to have stovepipe processes per use case. You can actually have a fabric concept that takes care of it. And the second thing I think that I heard is that the traditional trade-offs and pushing and butting of heads in the balance between governance that typically IT worries about and self-service that business vociferously demands doesn't have to be a butting of heads, that there is a win-all available. We're able to balance the self-service and governance aspects. And I think the other powerful thing I heard is the variety problem, right? I think we often don't talk about the variety beyond the structured, unstructured aspect, but your connectivity to all kinds of not only sources of data, but then applying a domain and being able to handle a variety of domains. So from banking, payments versus fraud versus lending, being able to handle that. I think these are great challenges that you're helping solve with SCIKIQ. So could you further elaborate on some real life use cases where some tangible value has been delivered, perhaps using SCIKIQ, or what kind of problems you guys have solved in real life?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. One to cover, at an enterprise level, how we are adding value, and one from a business persona standpoint. And these two examples can also kind of explain how SCIKIQ architecture is a little different compared to even a traditional data fabric architecture, because we are hybrid. It's a mix of data fabric plus a data mesh kind of a topology, what we are using under the hood. I'll see the usual fabric cases are like, building 360s. So that's a very usual suspect: employee 360, supplier 360, or your it can be customer 360, right? So let me give you a use case scenario. In order to build a 360, so this is for one of a real estate company. In order to build a 360 degree, you need to so first of all, you need to set up the right domain structure, right? What you're trying to build. Is it a customer 360, employee 360, right? So the way we start, and Vipul, I'll answer it with the practitioner view also, so that people can understand how this needs to be implemented also. We map things back to the value chain. So if I have to take banking as an example, so let's say within the card industry where you and I come from, so I'll map it to customer journey and a transaction journey. Let's say within the customer journey, you have processes like onboarding, you have processes like customer acquisition, retention, and development, right? And on the transaction journey, there is a charge which is happening, there's a billing which is happening, there is a servicing which is happening, right? There is a settlement which is happening. So these are customer journey processes. Based on your value chain within the industry, you define your processes level 1, level 2, level 3. These forms your domains and subdomains within SCIKIQ, right? So our thing is like, you are solving for a business problem. So first, mimic your data structure in alignment with your business strategy or your business structure. So that's how we do that. So in order to build a employee 360, the use case what I was talking about, you need to pick up the data. So employees their data can be mastered in multiple source systems, right? So there is HRMS system where it is mastered from your employee master standpoint. There can be a timesheet system. There can be a compliance system. There are multiple systems. How you bring about all of this data, right, in an integrated manner so that you can build an employee 360. The problem becomes complicated. Now imagine a large organization now, right, where they are using one system which is sitting on GCP, another system which is sitting on, let's say, Azure, and they are using ERP from, from a payroll standpoint or from finance standpoint. That ERP is sitting on SAP, which is on-prem, right? So in order to build a 360 view of the employee, the data need to be picked up from all these systems. So this is one of the use case what we are solving. Similar to this use case, we have solved it for a bank where data is cutting across, again, multiple source systems spread across multiple infrastructure topologies, and how it can be unified together. That's the Fabric side. And when you are integrating it, you need to solve for, is this a personal information? How my compliance teams, I can take care of my compliance team, how I can set up a right risk management practice on top of it, how I can, draw insights out of it. So the data quality, what Newell talked about, the data quality has also to be integrated. So that's one use case. Second is a very different use case where a fabric was already, enterprise-wide fabric was already put in place in one of the bank, right? Now, when you are building a fabric, or in the old construct, when you are building a EDW, enterprise data warehouse, enterprise architects aim for standardization. They aim for consistency, right? Whereas when you look at different personas, and this is people you and I spoke about earlier also, you have fraud, strategic analytics, you have risk, you have marketing, you have sales, different personas. Maybe they have a need to acquire 2, 3, 4 more systems, right? Which doesn't fit within the enterprise change management or enterprise overall change governance process. So now they're left by themselves to ingest the data, right? So how they can create something which is of value for running their day-to-day operations. This is where we are solving for a fraud analytics use case, where data is already sitting on a central repository. From a central repository for a fraud kind of a persona, how you can map different fraud domains, and for those fraud domains, how you can add additional sources and onboard multiple use cases for fraud, which is more from a mesh topology standpoint. So both these can work in tandem. People sometimes get confused, and maybe, Newell, do you agree to that statement? To me, there is fabric, there is mesh, and people get confused to pick for that.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I mean, data mesh, data fabric confusion may exist, and data fabric, as you know, is a semantic layer which sits above your sources. So you think about it, you got lakes, you got warehouses, you got databases, you got clickstream. So the fabric is above that layer, right? So it sits above this layer. It's a semantic layer containing only metadata, right? And that's what the fabric is the composure of, right? It's not a lake, it's a metadata layer and a semantic layer. It can interface in data sources at runtime and real time, right? So that's fabric. Now mesh architecture is more distributed, right? Which means that, hey, I actually have what's data distributed, and I'll have a domain, as you called out earlier on. We're going to have a domain for each of these distributed data. We're going to have ownership and accountability of data. So maybe it's finance data separate, customer data separate, right, going on. Maybe the supplier data separate, which is fine, because there are people who know those data better than anyone else in the organization. You have 5,000 people, but there are only like 50 people in the organization knows about supplier data. So that's a domain where these guys will actually own. So when you have building these different domains, and that's what the mesh is all about, you're building products, right? The products is a composure of metadata and data that could be leveraged by different applications or different domains or different fabrics as well, right? But what we see is that, when you have multiple of these data meshes, it kind of, in essence, becomes a fabric, right? I mean, if you connect all the dots together, it becomes a fabric, because you still need a federated governance. You can't actually have meshes running independently of each other. You need to have a federated governance, right? So basically, there's a lot of composure of similarities where people start with a fabric and start to architect into a mesh, or vice versa. You start with a mesh and make it a fabric, right? So we've seen both ways, actually. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually quite interesting, and kind of leads me to the next part of the discussion. But I do want to summarize kind of what I heard. And it's very interesting, Gaurav, that you began the discussion from the customer journey, because ultimately there's always the process value chains, either at speaking from the business speak, customer journeys, or you're talking about standard operating procedures that have been put in place for operations, and so on and so forth. So there's always these process value chains, but then at the same time, there's almost an explosion of events that is happening in the enterprise at all times, be it transactions, be it business events, be it data events or signals, right? And ultimately, I think what both architectures, Mesh and Fabric, are really trying to do is empower the end users to decide, not only decide, discover what events are they interested in from a data and business event perspective. And as an event happens, it could be a transaction, it could be a fraud instance, or it could be a risk violation. As those things happen, what value chain processes need to be put in place for that? And to your point, Noel, you could have atomicity to those various domains, or autonomy to those domains, but ultimately you need a union of states. You could not have a bunch of autonomous states call themselves a country. And I think that's where ultimately, whether you start with the mesh first, you land with the fabric, or if you start with the fabric first and you want to empower the domain users, you end up with a little bit of a mesh, right? So I hope that kind of made sense. In my little brain, that's how I've rationalized it. But I think that leads us probably to the next very interesting aspect. Ultimately, it is about the context with which you're, or the lens with which you're applying it. And Noel, I want to bring you back into the discussion. Could you elaborate on contextualization of data, what it is, and how do the fabric and mesh architectures help in achieving the contextualization?
Yeah. I mean, contextualization is one of the most fundamental principles of a data fabric or a data mesh as well, right? Without the context of data, the data is useless, actually, to be honest. It's in bits and bytes, right? Data could be garbage, I guess, right? In fact, you'll be surprised, only 25% of data today in most organizations is used for analytics. 75% of data is not used. It's hidden away somewhere. And why? Because people don't have the context of data of that 75%. Only 25% is used. Now, having said that, context of data is actually to identify it into a business term, right? Like, this is customer data, this is product data, this is supplier data. And I think you have to have this context of data, right? And I think this, having the taxonomy built around this is very important, especially if you're trying to bring in this new data sources. Like, if at all you're trying to get data from social media, how does that social media connect to my customer data? No, and that's very important, right? Because we want to know if this customer has been saying good things about the product or bad things about the product, but also what are the opportunities for us to sell to the customer if at all there are some weaknesses with the products, right? So connecting the dots is all about contextualization, right? So context is about data, is all about connecting the dots. Now, the connecting of the dots is not so easy to do, right? Sometimes you got to look at all of those things around manually, that, hey, this data connects with that data and what have you. And that's simple. If you have 10 sources of data, it's simple. When you have 1,000 sources, it becomes a nightmare of how you do the connections, right? And that's why new technologies and architectures have been emerging around knowledge graph and graph data engines, right? So graph engines, right, basically provides you that context of data through these connections, like a Facebook, right? When you join the Facebook, it'll give you recommendations about your friends and friends you may know, and how is it doing it through the connection of data, right? And I think connection of data is very important, and that's context, right? Context of data itself, right? So I think you got to do is to really have that enablement. Now, the good thing with Fabric is that Fabric actually has some now emerging built-in intelligence, which means as the data starts to get ingested or connected, it knows what data is getting connected, what data is getting ingested. Is it got customer data? Is it got private data, sensitive data? It doesn't know it. It's got partner data, supplier data. So the context becomes more rich and engaged with the Fabric. And I think as time progresses, we do believe that contextualization becomes even more relevant for these fabrics. And I think you're going to see a lot more. And you know, one way we've seen customers do is to have what you call these data models, which people have these templates, or what you call pre-built models, which could be leveraged so that they can actually jumpstart and accelerate those deployments, right? Otherwise, it could be a nightmare starting from ground up, which is what Fabric does, right? So, yeah.
No, again, excellent sort of analogy there. I'm reminded of an old joke where, you know, actually my father handed, it came from the fact that all the data practitioners were so focused on building that data dictionary first. And that data dictionary became a 6-month, 1 year, 2-year project of its own, that we want to collect that universe of all data elements. And I was always reminded about a joke my father used to play with me and said, you know, son, here it is. Every Shakespearean writing sonata to Leo Tolstoy to the editorial in today's page, everything in one place. And, you know, he would hand over the Oxford Dictionary to me. All the words are in there, but they make no sense unless you put them together in a meaningful and beautiful fashion, right? And I think that's probably, Noel, where you were trying to go. You could have all the data elements in the world, but if you cannot integrate them together with some context, they're just that, a dictionary, right? So that actually is great. Gaurav, maybe you can comment on that too, that how does SCIKIQ help achieve that data contextualization?
See, completely echo with both of you. Like, you know, when we spoke about data contextualization, without a context, data is just a data point, right? And data point is meaningless. It is subject to multiple interpretation, right? You know, number 3, you can interpret it differently. It can be 3 children, 3 houses, 3 wives, or whatever. So I don't know, like, you know, without a particular context, what data actually gives you. So looking at that, so the way I think most of the points Noel has already covered. So if you are looking from any fabric provider, so there are a couple of things which I call as a hygiene factor, which has to be there to build a right contextualization of the data. So first thing first, like, you know, there has to be a standard taxonomy, or there has to be a standard definition, so that we all are speaking English, or we are not speaking English and French in the same organization unless and until we understand French, right? So which means, like, you know, there has to be a common vocabulary, there has to be a common language. And that language can be developed either within the context of SCIKIQ. So you can ingest different kind of ontologies. So when I'm talking about ontologies, like, you know, there's OWL, there's RDF. So these are different formats where a standard data model is built, or a CDM, which is Microsoft Common Data Model, or if you are working within a banking. So there is, you know, I think this is what Noel talked about, like, you know, there are a lot of pre-work which is done as part of a standard body of knowledge by a lot of researchers, by different industries, or for example, FIBO. So you can ingest that. So SCIKIQ has integration done with common data model. You can pull out data from CDM or FIBO from a finance industry, which will give you access to standard terms which are used, right? Along with that, you can pull any ontology or terms from using OWL or RDF. So that's kind of, I'll call it as a hygiene, because this is something which is required. I don't think this can be called as a differentiation, because it has to be there. So, and then SCIKIQ has multiple screens where you can define terms. So these are business terms mapped to different glossaries, so that, what we are trying to solve here is a shared vocabulary. So all of this will give you a shared vocabulary. Once you have a shared vocabulary, right? So nothing is linear right now. So things are linked, right? So this is where the beauty of the graphs come into picture. So what we do when we connect to any data store, we pull out the metadata. At that time, when you're doing a connection, you can only pull out technical metadata, right? Now there has to be interlinkages between these technical metadata. This is what we are storing it in a graph database. In SCIKIQ, under the hood, we are using Neo4j, where the relationship between two metadata assets get discovered or get stored as part of the graph. So what it helps us now, this relationship along with your ontologies or definition, it helps you create a knowledge graph. And this knowledge graph can activate a lot of things, be it pipeline. So what Noel was talking about, when you're ingesting a new source, it can tell you, okay, this kind of a treatment which was done on these sort of attributes, and we recommend you to do that. So it is kind of helping you out in automating some of the steps or making your life easier. So that's and be having a domain-driven architecture where you are giving power to the business teams or power to the SMEs on a federated model. Because as I'll pick up the same numbers, because I want to quote Forrester there rather than picking up my own quote. So he mentioned 5,000. Let's stick to 5,000 number. If there are 5,000 employees within our organization, only 50 understand fraud, right? So they are subject matter expert on fraud. When we are talking about contextualization, nobody else in the organization know their fraud data better than these guys. So they should be made responsible for owning the quality, owning the data, owning even the source system, owning even the availability of the data. So for them, data, they are both provider and consumer of the data. So they should own SLAs on both the end, right? So that also adds to the contextualization. And that is how SCIKIQ is being set up or architected from the consumption layer standpoint.
Awesome. Very, very elaborate explanation. And I must say, a very rich example. 3 children, 3 houses, or 3 wives, all of them require a lot of money. So for me, I stick to 3 panelists and 3 drinks after this. I think that's actually more manageable for me. But any case, very, very interesting sort of discussion. To summarize, ultimately, data by itself is kind of meaningless. Whether you start from the ontology layer and go down to the semantics and all the way to the model, or you pick up a FIBO or FSLDM, start from model and go upwards, you really need to establish a common understanding and very well-defined context, so that the same data with its other subtypes and associations can mean something completely different. And that has to be communicated in terms of the data is almost a key value pair with the context with which you're delivering the data. So I think that for me at least was very enlightening. I'm pretty sure and hopefully everybody found it interesting. So with that, let's change gears a little bit, right? So we kind of talked about the broader challenges. We talked about challenges in implementing the fabric, and I see there's some Q&A questions that we'll take towards the end, which talk about organizational challenges or latency challenges. Let's broaden this even further, and it's questions really to both of you. What do you see as some of the more emerging and even disrupting trends and technologies? What do you see as some of the game changers in shaping the future data architecture or the future of the data architecture. Can you talk about some, more contemporary examples and advancements? When you were talking about the language model, the word at the tip of everybody's tongue these days is the large language model and the LLMs. So let's start with you, Gaurav, in terms of what do you see, where do you see the future of data architecture, data disruption? And while you start there, I think we can actually also put this out into the final poll of the day in terms of the emerging trends there. So Gaurav,
Sure.
why don't you take it first, and then I'll open it up to Noel.
See from a emerging, I think data story has just begun. So this industry was shaken up in last 8-10 years. I think there's a lot of complacency which has been built around this industry. Nothing changed. We were doing ETL for so many years and warehouses, and we used to love that. And now with Fabric and mesh kind of architecture, I think there's some more power which is coming to the way the data can be consumed. I'll talk purely, Vipul, from a consumption standpoint, and Noel can cover the other aspects. A data product. We spoke about data product. So once you have Fabric or mesh in place, how easy you can roll out data product? A, from a data exchange standpoint. B, even from a monetization standpoint. Or C, from a co-creation standpoint. So what I mean by that, let's take a simple example. Let's say you are a bank, you have built a profitability suite for your different merchants, right? So that data as a product, right? How you want to roll it out. So maybe you need help of a person, a data scientist who is, very accomplished data scientist, and who can add value to build this profitability suite, which is more like a forecasting model in this case, let's assume. So you can set up this data product where it can be co-created across the value chain. Or it can be, I build this, I want to roll it out to my ecosystem, to all my merchant. So that's what I was referring to as, data exchange standpoint. So co-creation, data exchange, or for monetization. I am in an industry which is dying, but I am sitting on a lot of data. How I can monetize some of the data by putting agri-tech product, by putting ed-tech product on top of it. So here we are putting data. So right now data has been captured, or data spent has been captured on the bottom line or on the expense line of any company's balance sheet or income statement, right? Now in future, I think it will add up to the top line, where we are taking it to the revenue, how data can add organization in their revenue generation abilities. LLMs, ChatGPT, we all love ChatGPTs or LLMs of the world. I think a lot can be done through LLM, where the role of human actor can be limited to an auditor role or a reviewer role, and maybe first order of generation or first order of information capturing can be done through these models. There are issues around legacy, privacy and all. We'll park it for a minute. So I think integration with LLM, or the way the currently ETL is done, I think that will also change or completely evolve over a couple of years, and it is happening even now. So data products, LLM, data exchange and data unions, these are becoming big, right? In Europe, I think by 2024, end of 24, data unions will come into play, right? Which means there will be union who can safeguard your interest, and they can help you getting your data monetized. So data union, data exchanges are also becoming a lot of, they are becoming very important these days. So for me, these are the top 3 trends purely from a consumption standpoint.
Noel, you want to comment on that? What do you see as the emerging trends and disruptions?
Yeah, absolutely. There's obviously a lot of things are going on. We talk about ChatGPT, LLMs, But one of the things we have seen things evolving right now is about the real-timeness of data, right? Real-time is very important. We believe only 20% of data today is considered real-time in organizations, 20%. That number is going to double in the next 5 years. But we believe, in fact, over the next decade, everything will be real-time. We're not there yet. Now, real-time, which means that as soon as the data is created, it's made available for consumption. Basically, doing analytics at the speed of transactions, right? Today, if you look at, we talk about ETL, data moves from transactional through ETL, through operational systems, ODSs, to data warehouses, and then comes to the dashboard. It comes in after 24 hours, right? Can we get that in 1 second? No, because the architecture cannot support 1 second, right? And that's where the fundamental discussion about Fabric, right? Fabric can overcome that because we can take a shortcut. We don't have to go through this hoops where you got to go from transactional to the operational to the analytical systems and then the dashboard. That's normal practice we've been doing for 20, 30 years now, but that's not going to work anymore, right? So the shortcut is, well, we go to the source system directly, right? That's what the Fabric does. So I would say real-time is becoming very important, and I think new architectures like data fabric, data meshes are addressing those aspects of it, very, very important. We also see AI machine learning, right? Now, interestingly, AI machine learning is two sides of a coin. One side of the coin is the consumption side, where the consumers are using AI machine learning to understand their data, the customer data and the business data, right? On the other side of the coin is also AI machine learning within the platform, the intelligence coming into the platform as well. As the system starts to learn about the data, it recommends you about this should be integrated, that should be integrated, this should be secured automatically through AI as well. And that's a very important point. We're seeing more intelligence coming into the platform as well through AI machine learning as well. And the third thing I think is integration with LLMs. Absolutely. We are very early on this space, right? Everyone wants to automate all these things. We're going to be having natural language interface towards data fabrics, right? We have already started to see that trend where you can actually ask questions to a fabric and Fabric gives you responses instead of writing SQL code, API code. Who wants to write API code and Java code? Right? It can automatically do that, right? We are very early on in this market, but the potential is huge, right? Especially having natural language interfaces or doing code generation, right, automatically as well. So.
No, absolutely, and you talked about LLM. I want to almost touch upon a caution that I provide some of my business partners is that you can ask me a question, but if you have not done your data hygiene correctly, my answer is going to be nonsensical, right? So there's a lot of focus now on, initially on natural language processing, it was about converting, language to data. Now it's about, spitting out natural language in a readable fashion with LLMs, which is really trying to convert data into language. But ultimately, if the core discipline around everything that you mentioned as components of the fabric, quality being prime, if that is lost, then ultimately
that's the reason why, and that's the reason why you have the fabric in place, right? Because the fabric not only just looks at the ingestion of data, what the question is, but also the outgoing data through the consumer, whether this data makes contextualized or not, is contextualized or not, right? That's very important. So it can do a validation. So there is a validation process coming in within LLMs, which says, okay, I can validate the data before getting out of the door. There's some banks doing it, by the way. So some of the banks I know which are doing it, the validation of data, which is critical, right? So not only about understanding what the data is all about in terms of the ingestion, but also while the delivery as well is a critical component. Absolutely.
Absolutely, and that's a great segue into it. You talk about the banks, right? I mean, the validation is almost mandated because there are certain things as a financial advisor or as a banker, I can disclose, and there's certain things I must not disclose, right? So as an example, I cannot discuss ethnicity of the borrower with my underwriter, and I have to make sure that that's not going out of my systems. So the validation is also about, putting the right guardrails so that you're not on the wrong side of certain compliances. And that's where we are seeing a lot of interest with the.
And that's why you want to open the doors of the LLM directly with the data, but you want to have this interface with the data fabric to really provide that context. Because you're right.
Absolutely.
You open up the doors to all data. Okay, here's all the 10,000 databases. Go figure what you want to do with it. Exactly, you run into that situation. But you have to have this layer of protection of the fabric to provide that context. Yeah.
So, and that's, I think, where I was taking to my last question for the day, I would say, is I thought that was a great segue. So what do the organizations need to do right now, right away? What should be the urgency towards data fabric and data mesh strategies? What should be urgent? I'd like to open this last question to both of you. From your perspective, what should organizations look at from an urgency perspective?
Well, I mean, it is critical, right? I mean, the question I think is not when, but I think more important is they have to really implement data mesh, data fabric, right? That's the basic of the architecture, especially with this disconnected world we have today with multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, and all the sources going on. You really have to have that. But I would say people sometimes understand that, well, we are putting a lot of investment into this. What is going to be the return? Like, and management says, like, well, you should not really be investing in data mesh, data fabric because it's too expensive. My take on that is you start small and grow, right? You don't have to boil the ocean, boil the lake. This is fabric. First of all, you have to understand a fabric is not like a multi-year project. It can be done in days. In days, you start with a project on a fabric. That's why the investment is very low. And then you grow with this because you can actually add more sources over a period of time as well, right? This is very important. And then you have to have a team. Don't start it as a project with like 2 people. It's not going to work very well. You're going to have multiple people, but developers and engineers working with data scientists, perhaps, and even security people and business analysts together to drive this result, right? And that's very important. We've seen more people being successful if you're starting with small implementation and growing with this. And then check the implementation in days, and weeks. If you can't do the value proposition in days and weeks, well, fabric may not be right for you, I would say, right? And that's the thing. So I think it's a very urgency because if you need to get consistent, trusted, real-time data, fabric it is, along with data meshes.
All right, Gaurav, your closing thoughts on that before I open it up to some of the Q&A.
I think what is a major hindrance is or what they should be doing. First thing first, get themselves more literate around data and what it can do. So data literacy, I think it is not fully tracked from an organization standpoint. And if it is linked to the data adoption metrics, right? Despite of spending so much of dollars or money into building a data management platform, how many business users are using it and how they are using it? If you can link it to adoption metrics, I think that can help drive some of the change. So it's not linked fully to that extent. And B, if senior management can think beyond reports and dashboard, I think that's another area which can push things onto the agenda, because still we are seeing there's a discussion starting from a fabric mesh standpoint, but end of the day, everybody want their report to be delivered, right? So I think beyond reports and dashboards, and these are the 2 points.
Got it. So thank you, first of all, folks, for really an engaging and, at least for me, a very insightful, enlightening conversation. I learned a lot, and I hope most of the other folks as well. Speaking about some of the Q&A that we have gotten, we kind of touched on the data fabric. Does it deal with only real-time data? I would say it does not, but it does enable you to process in real time all kinds of data, right? So I think that's one question we answered from one of the anonymous users. I think specific to where we were right now, There's a question from Raman Rastogi. And the question is that there's inertia within the organizations on adopting the new platform, having understood the challenges, the urgency, still there's a certain amount of inertia. How can companies overcome that?